Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for accelerating your Azure IT business through all-in automation. My name is Madison Lichtman. I'll be here to moderate questions at the end and go over some housekeeping items. But today you'll be hearing from Vadim Vladimirsky. Vadim is the CEO of Nerdio and the key driver behind the creation and evolution of Nerdio for Azure and Nerdio Private Cloud, seeking to bring IT as a service to the masses. Today, Vadim will explore how to build and grow your Azure IT practice, reduce the complexity and costs associated with moving customers to Azure, and maximize profitability and streamline operations through IT automation. So just a few housekeeping items before we get things started. We will be recording the webinar, and you will receive an email with that along with the presentation slides in the coming days. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to send them in, and there will be a short Q&A portion at the end. Now to get things started, I'm going to hand things over to Vadim.
Thanks, Madison. It's great to be here, and thanks everyone for joining us today to learn about Nerdio for Azure. As Madison mentioned, my name is Vadim Vladimirsky, and I'm the founder and CEO of Nerdio. And the product we'll be talking about today is Nerdio for Azure, which is something that's been built and designed specifically for MSPs to build their IT services practice in Azure by simplifying the pricing, packaging, provisioning, and management of Azure IT environments. So to get started, let me tell you a bit about our company. We started out as an MSP back in 2005, and we've developed a fairly unique offering for back then, which was this what we call a complete IT in the cloud practice. Today we call it IT as a service, or various other names that you may hear. But we've really built a sizable practice, have onboarded many hundreds of customers fully onto the cloud, where we take their desktops and servers and all of their applications and databases and move them into the cloud. We were an early SPLA partner with Microsoft and have really built that business over a course of over a decade. A few years ago, what we realized was that we created a ton of really valuable technology to make ourselves a more efficient and effective service provider. And we decided that we're going to package all that technology together and make it available to other MSPs to be able to build similar cloud-based IT practices. We called the technology Nerdio, and it sort of came to life in 2016. And it was running on top of our private cloud deployment that we've been using for our own customers for many years, which was a VMware-based technology stack. As we started talking to lots and lots of MSPs throughout the country, the constant feedback we were getting was, they really loved the automation and simplicity of Nerdio, but a lot of them were hesitant to put clients, their customers, into our private cloud, and many have asked for a way to use the same automation, but be able to do it in the public cloud, with Microsoft Azure obviously being the leading choice for them. So in response to that feedback, we created a version of our Nerdio product specifically for Azure, which is the product we're going to be talking about right now. A bit about our kind of involvement with Microsoft. We're a gold Microsoft partner. We have gold competencies in the cloud platform, obviously, and small and mid-market cloud solutions. We are an ISV and also deal with a lot of the productivity products with Microsoft. We also happen to be what Microsoft calls an IP co-sell ready solution, which means that their own internal sellers can actually sell the solution and get credit towards their quota. So we're listed in the Azure Marketplace and App Source, and very, very closely aligned with Microsoft and their efforts in bringing Azure to the masses. We're part of Azure Advisors, which is a special NDA group that allows us access to some of the upcoming features before they even get announced. So that's a bit of a background on the company. Now, what is Nerdio for Azure and what problem does it set out to solve? So as we went to market and started working with many MSPs, we kept hearing a sort of a consistent set of challenges that MSPs are running into when thinking about moving their customers into Azure. And these fall into these three main buckets. The first of which is that Azure is perceived to be very expensive. And it's expensive both as a hosting environment. If you take an unoptimized IT system from on-prem or from a colo and move it into Azure, it is likely going to cost a lot more than the alternative. And also, in order to implement things in Azure and onboard customers and manage them, you need fairly expensive and well-experienced engineers to do that work, which also tend to be, an expensive type of labor to obtain and retain. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is that Azure is really viewed as a very complex technology. It's complex both technically, because architecting an Azure-based solution is difficult. There's a ton of different products and SKUs and components, and everything is changing so rapidly that it's difficult to keep up. It is also designed more for application development and DevOps rather than IT administration. And that makes it difficult for MSPs who obviously deal mostly with IT administration to try to translate some of the Azure concepts into the more familiar IT administration concepts. And finally, pricing of Azure is really challenging because it is a consumption-based model, and most MSPs are really used to fixed type pricing in order to build their own offers on top of that, of those types of solutions, and Azure makes it really difficult. And then finally, the third category is the risk. Azure is perceived as risky. Number one, as I mentioned, because your customers expect you provide a fixed priced solution. They don't want to hear that, their IT system will drastically vary in cost from month to month. They look at their MSP as the expert who should assume that risk for them. But using Azure to deliver on that promise of fixed pricing is challenging. So there's a perceived amount of risk there, because if you price something on a fixed basis and then it ends up costing more than you anticipated, obviously that's not good for margin at all. And then the second challenge from a risk perspective is that you really need those Azure experts that I mentioned earlier, who are very difficult to find and retain in today's IT employment market or unemployment market, which is pretty non-existent. And the challenge is, if you have an IT expert who onboards a bunch of customers and then walks out of the door and goes to a competitor or something, it's very difficult to continue managing and providing the right service levels to those customers, because there's a lot of unique know-how that those experts possess. So to address those challenges is what caused us to create Nerdio for Azure, and all the functionality that we'll be talking about, and the demo of the product that you will see in a few minutes is really all centered on addressing those three challenges of Azure being expensive, complex, and risky. And the goal of Nerdio for Azure is to simplify and accelerate the transition from an on-prem environment and management of an on-prem environment to an IT environment in Azure. And we do that in a few different ways. First and foremost, we've created a piece of technology that we call the total cost estimator, that looks at all the components of an IT system running in Azure, not just Azure consumption, but also things like Office 365 and bandwidth and storage and compute and RDS licensing and other components. And from sort of business level type of information, designs an environment and provides a fixed per user per month price with very, very great accuracy. So, helping our partners price and package their own offers based on Azure is a significant component of the product. The second component is this automated provisioning. And just to give you some context around it, it would take an experienced engineer from end to end to build a full IT environment, to stand up Active Directory and integrate it with Azure AD and Office 365, set up RDS deployment and VDI and file servers and backups, etc. It could take between 2 to 3 weeks of full-time engineering work. What we've been able to do through standardization and using deployment templates is reduce that time from 2 to 3 weeks of engineering work down to 2 hours of elapsed time with zero engineering involvement. And you will see that in just a few minutes of exactly how simple and robust that process is. So once the environment is provisioned, managing it is really important, and managing it in a single place with a great degree of simplicity is really important. So what we've done is we created a single pane of glass management portal that lets you see and manage all of your customers all in one place, lets you dig into each individual customer and manage every IT component in their environment that's running in Azure from one portal. So you can manage everything from servers and users and desktops and Office 365 licensing and backup and you know, DR. All of those things can be managed from one place. And then finally, in order to make an IT system running in Azure cost effective, remember that whole expensive challenge that we're trying to address, we've created a really unique cost optimization technology in the product that uses anticipated user demand on the system and right sizes by auto scaling the system to the right, you know, user demand. So the best way to waste money in Azure is to build really big servers and have them run 24/7 without taking into account the fact that they're heavily underutilized. So what our solution does is it allows the system to dynamically size those down when they're not being used, or even shut them off if necessary, so that consumption money is not being spent on compute capacity that is not being utilized. So, you know, one of the ways that I like to illustrate how the technology can be used is talking about this IT as a service use case. And IT as a service, you know, takes into account the concept that any IT environment that you look at, any SMB IT environment will have, you know, at the minimum, these 5 core components. There will be a set of desktops that the users use to interact with their data and applications. There will be servers, those could be physical or virtual for things like files and Active Directory and databases, etc. There will be a messaging and collaboration suite, you know, typically Office 365 in our world. There's got to be some good security technology, things like antivirus and content filtering and data encryption, things like that. And finally, no system can be complete without a robust backup and DR set of components. And then you, as the service providers, you offer your own unique services on top of that technology stack, typically things like help desk support, proactive monitoring, migration and onboarding services, maybe line of business application development and support, IT strategy consulting, you know, things like that. Where Nerdio fits in is sort of in between those two rings. It sits on top of the technology that's running in the Microsoft cloud. It packages it and stitches it all together. It provisions it all as a unit and gives you a management portal to manage all of those components from one place for all of your customers. And it also has this optimization technology that I talked about to make it cost effective. So, you know, we talked about some of these components, but this is just a bit more detail on the functionality of Nerdio for Azure, or NFA for short. If you hear me refer to NFA, that's what I mean. So automated provisioning, really, really important. Take something that's very time consuming, very complex, and automates it end to end. You'll see that in a minute. Single pane of glass of management that has a management philosophy of 3 clicks or less for pretty much every function. Again, you'll see it in a minute. Automation of backup and disaster recovery, a very robust onboarding tool set that actually helps migrate data, migrate directory, you know, really simplify the process of taking a customer from their current environment and bringing them into the Azure-based IT environment. This intelligent auto scaling that helps with cost optimization. And then finally, a set of performance monitoring tools that uses visual synthetic monitoring to actually monitor what the end user performance is from an end user perspective. So instead of looking at things like CPU utilization and disk IO usage or things like that, the visual synthetic monitoring looks at things like how long did it take a user from the time they typed in the password to the time their icons popped up on the screen, how long did that take? Or when they were sending an email, how long did it take from the time they opened up a new message and click send, how long does that? And then it visualizes that information and then provides it in a summarized way to the administrator so you can make better decisions on how to properly size the environment. Is it undersized? Is it oversized? You can make those decisions based on actual end user performance data. So when I talk about automated provisioning, I kind of threw a bunch of things out there that, what actually gets built. This is a system diagram. You'll have access to these slides so you can, digest it more fully. I'm obviously not gonna spend time going through this in detail. It's also available on our website. You can pull it up from our site, but you can see here a typical environment that gets provisioned right out of the box. So the environment gets built with all of the necessary networking, with a LAN and a DMZ zone, with the necessary firewall rules in between them. It builds an Active Directory with all the necessary DHCP and DNS and group policy and multi-factor authentication, builds a file server with all the file shares and NTFS permissions, creates an RDS deployment and a VDI deployment, enables Azure Recovery Services for things like backup and DR, plugs everything into Office 365 with ADFS Federation, and really creates an environment at which you can add users, install applications, move the data, and it's ready to go within 2 hours of clicking submit. Now, a common question is, okay, well, how is this technology used? Or, in what scenario, what customer scenario would I leverage NFA? And there are really 4 of the most common scenarios that are on this slide. I'll walk through them quickly. It could be used in other ways, but these are the most common ones. The first one, I've already talked about it. We call it this IT as a service, typically done for a small and mid-sized business. The concept here is you want to do a full IT migration from on-prem or from an existing cloud into Azure. The goal is to completely eliminate the need for any local IT infrastructure. And it's more of a lift and shift approach. You're taking things almost as they are and moving them into the cloud. So that's really the most common and the most robust use case. For enterprises and large environments that happen to leverage RDS at a large scale, NFA allows them to extend that deployment and move RDS or extend RDS into Azure and place those desktop resources closer to the users, leveraging Azure's global footprint. So that's a common approach for large deployments. It's more of a phase-in approach. It doesn't replace the entire IT, just extends the RDS functionality. Desktop as a service is commonly used in scenarios like a call center, where you want to put up a lot of desktops for maybe a new office that's opening up, or for a very simple set of applications that users may use, but without moving the server workloads and the data out of where they are today, just establishing connectivity back to either a corporate data center or another cloud, and just hosting desktops in Azure. And then the final use case, we call it line of business servers. This is where you're not really, or your customer is not really ready to start moving users' desktops into the cloud, but there are some servers that may be coming up for a refresh, and it's a natural way of extending an existing environment from a networking and the directory perspective, allowing you to take server VMs, move them into Azure, manage and auto-scale them there, and back them up and protect them and do all kinds of things in Azure with a fully connected environment where the desktops stay where they currently are at. So those are the 4 of the most common use cases. So what are some of the reasons or some of the benefits why MSPs use NFA? The easiest way to think about it is NFA enables a very natural and robust use case of Azure, meaning you use a lot of Azure services in a way that you're already offering these things to your customers who are the SMBs, right? So, instead of putting servers on-prem or putting in them in AWS and figuring out how to do RDS or local desktops, you can do everything you're doing, deliver all of the managed services you're currently delivering in very much the same way, using the same set of tools, but with the infrastructure being in the cloud instead of being on-prem. So what that does is it expands the contribution margin from, let's say a per user on an Office 365 being, 10% or whatever it is, significantly, right? That typically we see gross margins on services built on top of NFA in the 40 to 60% range. And it makes Azure an affordable platform to do that with. Whereas without NFA and without its cost optimization, it could tend to be kind of expensive, where there isn't much room for margin for MSPs left to capture. So that's on the economic side. On the operational impact side, the goal is that it lowers the cost of service delivery through automation. Lots of things that you would have had to do manually are now fully automated. Again, you'll see that in the demo in just a little bit. You have a single management console that lets you manage multiple customers and all aspects of their IT environment from one place, which eliminates mistakes and obviously saves time in remediating those. And it lets you leverage lower skilled resources to do the types of things that you would normally have to get engineering involved with. So you can, with the Nerdio admin portal, which with its 3-click management philosophy, you can use, tier 1 and tier 2 help desk personnel to do things like spin up new servers if you wanted them to, add new users, configure new desktops, the types of things you would normally need an engineer to go into the Azure admin portal or go into the Office 365 admin portal with administrator credentials to do that. You no longer have to do it. You can delegate access to lower tiered resources, again, making you more efficient as an MSP. And then finally, from a customer success perspective, imagine, this becomes a very sticky service because now they have a single relationship with you as the MSP that you're providing them, not just the managed services on top of technology that they buy, but you're actually providing them the entire technology stack, everything from desktops to servers to Office 365 and backup and DR and encryption and all of those things all in a single package. Users also get better end user experience. There are fewer break fix issues because of the standardization and having a more stable environment in Microsoft Azure. And the obvious benefit to the users is having this anywhere access and very consistent end user environment because of its virtual desktop capabilities, regardless of what physical device they happen to be using.
Thank you so much. All right, for this next portion of the webinar, we will be showing you a pre-recorded demo of Nerdio's platform that Vadim was kind enough to talk us through.
So what we're looking at right now is the Nerdio admin portal, or NAP for short. We are logged in as an MSP. I'm gonna, if I use terms like reseller or partner, those are all interchangeable. So this portal is what you would see where all of your customers would be listed. It would give you sort of high-level information about each customer. You could see Azure specific information like what region this is provisioned in, whether backup is enabled, what Office 365 and Azure tenant are being used, etc. And the thing that I want to show you is what it looks like to add a new NFA account. So let's click on this Add NFA Account button. We have 3 things we got to do. First, we have to connect it to an Azure subscription. And the way we do that is, again, we just click Add Connect to Azure. We type in a username and password of an account that has the ownership rights on an Azure subscription. You would get that subscription provisioned typically through your CSP provider, or you can buy it directly from Microsoft, or a customer may already own one. So all you need to do is provide credentials of a user that has access to that subscription. It will ask you to accept that the application can now have access into it. When you do that, you'll be able to select the region where this is going to get provisioned into, and this supports all of Microsoft's global regions. I think there are about 50 or so nowadays. It also will validate that there are sufficient cores quota available inside of the Azure account to make sure that this provisioning will work, and warn you if there aren't. Step number 2 is plugging this into an existing Office 365 account. Same concept, you click Connect to Office 365, type in your credentials, allow the application access into Office 365. This will typically be an existing non-empty account, right? Because most of our customers already are leveraging Office 365, and Nerdio will seamlessly integrate into that new environment and have visibility of everything that's going on there without any disruption. So you connect it to Azure, you connect it to Office 365, you give the company a name just so you can identify them in the list, and then you select from 2 versions of the product. We have an enterprise version, which is a full-featured product that's designed for anywhere from 1 to thousands of users. And then we have a professional product, which is a product designed for really small end customers with up to 25 users. We have 3 standard templates, P5, P15, and P25. You can mouse over here and it will tell you kind of what's unique about each one of these and what the estimated cost is for running that template on a monthly basis. So you give it a company name, you select the plan, and you click Save. And once you do that, there's a new account that's going to show up on this screen. It's going to have a status of provisioning. And 2 hours later, that account will be ready to go. You'll be able to log in and actually connect as a user with a virtual desktop, install applications, add user accounts, and you can technically go into pilot or even to production very, very quickly. So let's take a look, since it's going to take a couple of hours to provision a new one. Let's look at a previously provisioned account. It's called Morehart Inc., account ID 5009. We're going to click this little login button to the right. And what you'll notice is that the context of my view has changed. Instead of now seeing what an MSP would see, or the one provisioning new customer accounts, you're now seeing what an IT administrator would see. Now, this could be you as the MSP, in most cases, is going to be driving here. But we also do have functionality for you to delegate certain of these functions down to maybe your customer has an IT department with either help desk or some IT administrators. You have the ability to delegate some administration down to those users. So obviously we won't have time to look at all of the product, but let me show you a couple of different areas here to get the point across. So first place we'll go is this users module. Okay, and if you look at the users module, looks like a regular user list, but if you look at it closely, you'll notice that this brings information in from multiple places, multiple different systems. For example, you can see the Office 365 licensing. You can see the Exchange Online email address. You can see the Active Directory username and group membership right here. You can see the type of desktop that's assigned to this user. So this Andy IT admin happens to have a VDI desktop, which means it's a dedicated VM for that particular user. It's a single core 3.5 gig of RAM machine. Microsoft name for it is D1V2. You can see the last time the user logged in, and you can even quickly disable the login for that user if you wanted to from this screen. And then to the right here, you have a bunch of actions, the kinds of things that MSPs do to manage their customers every single day. Things like resetting a password, resetting the desktop, reverting the profile, the Windows profile from a backup, maybe reverting the desktop back to its golden image or kind of factory settings. You can archive users, replace users, delete users, monitor their email, forward their email to someone else, look at their performance. Lots of really useful functionality that we'll look at in just a couple of minutes. Now, let's say you have this Andy IT admin, which is a VDI user. And for the next week or so, this person is going to be working with some really large spreadsheets and they need additional horsepower. So you want to give them a bigger desktop to work with for the next week or so. So what do you do in that case? So what you will do is click on the user's name right there. It will bring you to the edit user screen, and you can see under the desktop section, we have VDI selected and we have a VDI desktop size set up right here. We can change this user's desktop to a larger one. Let's say we're going to give them a 4-core and 16 gig of RAM VM. Just make this one selection, click save, and in a few minutes, this user's desktop will be upgraded to that larger size. And then once they're done using that large VM, they no longer need the horsepower. You can downgrade it back or change it to any other instance or any other VM size. Let's see what it looks like to add a new employee that starts with the organization. So, imagine normally you probably have a checklist how to add a user to Active Directory, how to assign a license in Office 365, add email aliases, install Office, install antivirus, set a backup, etc. Let's see what it looks like in Nerdio. So you click on Add User. We're going to type in the first name and last name of the user. Type in an email address. We can add email aliases right from this screen. If we type in a phone number in this window, it will automatically enable two-factor authentication. So when the user connects to their desktop, they will be prompted with, with a field that they'll need to type in an SMS code, which will be sent to their phone. It supports authenticator apps. It supports voice calls. There's all kinds of additional customizations you can do, but by default, this is going to be an SMS message. Then you get to select what Office 365 license to assign to this user. Remember, when we provision the account, we plug it into an existing Office 365 deployment. So here it knows what licenses are available, and if you mouse over, it will even tell you how many are purchased and how many are assigned. So we can see that E3 is available, so we can select that. Then over here, we can decide whether we want to do any of that management delegation I talked about earlier. So we can allow this user to have access to the NAP, to the Nerdio admin portal, either as an account IT administrator, which has access to everything here, or as a tier 1 support person, which will have access to users, groups, and share boxes, but not servers and networking and backup and DR and things like that. So in this case, we're going to uncheck this box. And then in some rare instances, you may be creating kind of an IT administrator or maybe a service account. You can very easily make this user a domain admin by checking this box. Then we go down to the desktop section. You can either give the user no desktop at all. Maybe they'll never be logging into a virtual desktop or an RDS session. You can assign them to an RDS collection or an RDS session host. You can choose from this list what's available, and you can create additional ones very easily right here. So if this is a light user, this is likely the selection you're going to make. In some cases, you're going to want to assign users a dedicated VM that's going to be fully theirs, maybe some executives or some graphical users that maybe need GPUs, things like that. So when you do a VDI machine, as you saw earlier, you can select from commonly used sizes or really from any available Azure size. So anywhere from a single core all the way to, I don't know, 64 cores, 32 cores, all different sizes here. Now, what you'll notice is that some of these are grayed out, and if you mouse over, it will tell you why. For instance, this says 64 cores required, but only 20 cores are available in the account. So, in order to use such large machine, you would have to ask Microsoft to increase the quota of how many cores are available for you. And that's why this is grayed out. So these are kind of guardrails built throughout the product to make sure that Azure doesn't balk at anything that you try to do in the environment. All right, so let's say in this case, John Smith is going to be a light user. We're going to assign John to an existing session host for accounting department, let's say. And if he's joining the accounting department, we can type in the name of a user or a template, and it will automatically pre-populate all of the security groups and all of the extended attributes relevant to that particular template or that particular user type. And then the very last step is sending a welcome email to the user. It's optional, but what you do is you type in the user's personal email address in here, and they will get an email that looks something like this. Now, important to keep in mind, all of the branding that you currently see as Nerdio can be white labeled. So you can put your own logos, your own names, your own contact information, and links to your own help centers. All of that is fully customizable with your own branding. But this is what the email will look like. It will have some next steps on how to log in, etc. It will have their login information, username, and password. But what's really important is that it will have an attached RDP file if you've assigned a desktop to this user, that they can double click on that file, type in the password that is in this email, and be in the system within 2 or 3 minutes from the time that I click the save button. So you've just now onboarded the user. It will create their Active Directory. It will synchronize it with Office 365, assign the license, set up all the email aliases, create two-factor authentication methodology that's needed. It will spin up a desktop. It will have Office installed and activated. It will add them to the right security groups in AD, etc. So all of that stuff that normally is done manually, you've now fully automated, and you have a user who's ready to go in minutes from the time you click the save button. Now, the common question I get at this point is, well, what does this look like from an end user perspective? Like, how does the end user get into the system? So let's look at an example. Let's take this Angie Accounting. Angie Accounting is an RDS user. She's assigned to a specific session host that may have been set aside for accounting users. It's a 2-core, 4 gig of RAM machine, pretty small, but that's maybe all she needs. And if you want to log in as Angie, what you would do is click this Generate RDP button, which gives you this handy box where you can select what features are available to Angie when she logs in. So you can select from things like local printer redirection, allowing copy and paste. You can allow local drive access. You can redirect microphone, etc. Then you get to select whether you want to publish the entire desktop or if you want to publish an individual application as a remote app available on that desktop. If you click here, you can select from a list of pre-installed applications, and it will create an RDP file that's specifically for remote app. And then here you get to choose whether you want to email the file directly to Angie or maybe to your own email address to put down on her desktop, or you can download the file right here. So for our demo here, we're going to download it. So we're going to click confirm. You can see down here, we have Angie's desktop that just got downloaded. I'm going to click on it. You'll notice I got no unknown publisher warnings or anything like that. That's because the file is SSL signed and encrypted. You can see all of the information is pre-configured. It knows the RD gateway, it knows Angie's server name and desktop machine name, it knows the username. The only thing I need to do is type in the password, and hopefully I remember what that is on this account. And after typing in the password, you can see we are now logging in into Angie's desktop, which obviously looks just like any Windows desktop with Office pre-installed, with any other applications you may want to configure, with backup installed, and everything is ready to go, and Angie can start her work. Okay, so that is what the end user experience looks like. And then you'll see here that Andy's desktop has now been upgraded, right? So now it's a 4-core, 16 gig of RAM machine. You can see that we just went through that process down here. It took a few minutes. Looks like it started at 12:34, finished at 12:40. So that took a few minutes there. Okay, now what we're gonna do is log in as Andy, kind of do the same thing we just did with Angie, and just make sure that we have the right number of resources. We would expect 4 cores and 16 gigs of RAM. So there we go. We're logging into Andy's machine. We're going to pop open the task manager. And you saw that two-factor authentication prompt came up shortly, but because there was no phone number in Andy's account, it didn't stop there. It just proceeded. So let's go into task manager. Take a look at what type of VM we have, just to double check that we got what we needed. Yep, perfect. We got 16 gigs of RAM and we have 4 CPUs, and that is what we're expecting from this particular VM. So to stop wasting money in Azure, I'm going to go back in here, change it back down to a single core VM, click save, and in a few minutes that process is going to be done. Okay, a couple of other quick things I want to show you. Let's flip over to the server screen. This is where you would manage the various server VMs in addition to kind of the desktop VMs we looked at. And for any of you who have done management of VMs in Azure, I think you'll appreciate the simplicity of this. So this lists some of the VMs you've already seen on the diagram. There's a domain controller, a file server, RD gateway, a session host, etc. And you can see the description and the VM size. If you wanted to add a new server, you click Add Server down here, give it a name, select an operating system you want on that server, select the type of disk storage, either SSD or spinning media, select the instance type, and this actually will guide you what instance type is appropriate for what type of VM. There's even GPU-enabled instances for people who use SolidWorks and AutoCAD and Creative Suite and things like that. And then you just click OK. And in a few minutes, this VM will not only spin up, be added to the right place in the right network, it will even be joined into your domain. So you can click Generate RDP file, log into it, and install your software, and you have a server that's ready to go. Now, let's say you have this file server, and it's currently a single core VM, and you want to grow it. What you do is you click the little pencil on the VM size, and again, it's just as simple as selecting something from the drop-down. I can take that file server from a single core to a dual core just with a couple of clicks right here. Similarly, if you have a data disk on this particular file server that's 128 gigabyte SSD and you're running out of space, you want to grow it, you just click here. It gives you a list of available disks that you can upgrade to, things that are same size or larger. So you can upgrade to a larger SSD, or you can even change to the cheaper type of storage, which is spinning media, not SSD. So you can do that on the fly. So let's say we're going to go from a P10, which is 128, to a P15, which is 256. And now if we leave this checkbox over here checked, what's going to happen after I click OK is not only will it grow the disk in Azure, but it's actually going to log into the Windows operating system and grow the volume for you. So you don't never even have to log into the VM to increase the size of that data disk. And there's lots of other handy things you can do from here. Obviously, start and stop the servers. You can add additional storage, so you can add additional disks to an existing VM if you wanted to. You can manage networking, so you can manage the IP address. It knows automatically what your IP schema is. You can put a server on the LAN or the DMZ. You can set it to dynamic or static IP addresses. Again, makes it really easy to manage. And then the other thing you can do is you can manage the auto scaling of that server. So let me give you an example. So let's say we have an application server that's doing some performance monitoring, but that server is, very expensive. It's got, let's call it 8 cores or something. This one doesn't, but let's use that as an example. Let's say it has 8 cores and it's fully, utilized during business hours, but outside of business hours, it really isn't used much. It's needed occasionally by a few users, so you don't want to shut it down necessarily, but it doesn't need to have the full 8 cores. So what you do is you go into the server auto scaling. You set the work days and work hours for that server. So let's say it's Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Let's say central time. And then you get to choose what happens to the server outside of those hours. So you can either, have it do nothing, right? Don't change it in any way. You can power it off, which will make it unavailable. You will be paying nothing for it while it's not running, but it's also not going to be available for someone who wants to utilize it. Or what you can do is you can go in and downgrade or upgrade that server outside of those business hours. So this happens to be a single core VM, so there's not much further we can downgrade it. But imagine this was an 8 core VM. You can easily come in here and make it to be 1 core VM outside of those hours. And now for 142 out of the 162 hours in a week, you're paying an eighth of what the production cost of that server happens to be. So obviously drives a ton of savings for you and your customer. The product also supports something called burstable instances. These burstable instances are interesting in that they allow you to bank credits, and those bank credits can be used to burst later. So they're cheaper than non-burstable instances. They're sort of the standard ones, and they're appropriate for things like domain controllers, occasionally file servers, or things like connection brokers and things like that, but not always for RDS session hosts and desktops. Going down the list, we have something called RDS Collections. If you recall, I mentioned that you can assign RDS users to either a session host, which is an individual VM that could be shared by multiple users, or a collection of identical of those VMs. So if you have a large user population and you want that collection to scale out as they log in and then scale back in at the end of the day, you can create a collection, and all you need to do is just click Add Collection, select an existing session host, give it a name, and it does all of the work for you. And once a collection is created, you can configure its auto scaling settings. So you set the boundaries, sort of what the minimum number of hosts in collection, what the maximum number of hosts is, and then you tell it the scaling logic. So for instance, if it's 70% CPU utilization across all of the hosts for 10 minutes or more, then add a new host into the collection. And until it drops below that threshold, it's going to keep adding hosts of VMs until this maximum here. And then after the utilization drops below 40% for 20 minutes, and only after 6 p.m., which is when business hours are over, will it start removing the hosts with the least number of users. And obviously, users will be warned in advance. You can select how long in advance, and you can customize the message. So it really gives you a very flexible way of supporting large numbers of users with a collection that will grow on demand and shrink after that demand dies down. And then finally, the section here allows you to modify your VDI golden image. This will be for the VDI users who have a dedicated VM for their desktop. You can simply click here to start. It will power it on. You will then click generate RDP file, connect into it, and be able to make any customizations. Then come back in here, stop it, which will set it as a template. And then any newly created users will have that VM as their starting template. One other thing I'll show you, maybe two other quick things I'll show you is this backup. So backup automation in this environment is really powerful because it leverages the native Azure backup and Azure site recovery services. It configures it for you completely and maintains and lets you monitor and restore backups from this one screen. So what this is doing right now is going and querying the backup engine that's running in Azure. And what you'll see here, there'll be a on and off button right up here on the right. It will automatically start out as off, and when you click it to turn on, it will go through and create the backup infrastructure on the back end. It will iterate through all of the VMs and add them into the backup schedule, which was by default a 30-day retention running once a night. And then it will start backing those up, and any new VM you add, whether it's a server or a desktop, will automatically be added into this backup routine. So you don't have to think about, hey, I just added the server and then 3 weeks later somebody loses a file and you realize you forgot to add it into the backup. It's all done for you automatically. You can obviously come in here and exclude certain servers from backup. For instance, maybe we don't want to be backing up this collection template. So we come in here, say remove from backup, and click confirm. Or you can even restore servers from here. So you click the restore button, you select from a previous backup snapshot, check the box that you know what you're doing, and click confirm, and that will do the restore for you in the background automatically. The other thing I wanted to show you is VPN. Most environments will start out by being connected to an existing office, right? Typically you would have an on-prem firewall at your customer's location, and you would want things like network printing, network scanning, maybe file transfer. And working with VPNs in Azure directly is not a trivial task. So we can simplify and automate all of that for you. You click the button to turn it on, which is on already. It will build the entire Azure infrastructure to enable VPNs. It will create the gateway, it will create the gateway subnet, and then give you this ability to add VPN connections. When you click add VPN connection, the only thing you need to provide is a name, the IP address of the other end of the firewall that you're going to be connecting to, and then the local subnet. And once you do that, it's going to go into Azure and spin up a VPN connection. It will auto-generate the shared secret. It's going to create all the necessary authentication proposals and configure everything to best practice. And eventually you will get a pop-up that will look like this. And now you simply take these settings that are in here, you plug them into your firewall, and that's it. You save them, and this VPN connection changes from connecting to connected, and now you have a site-to-site VPN. So these are just some of the examples of the type of automation that Nerdio for Azure provides for you in terms of provisioning these environments and then letting you manage them very, very easily. So again, very powerful way to do this. And one other thing I'll show you, I'm going to jump back out to the reseller level, and I'm going to show you what the NFA cost estimator looks like. The NFA cost estimator is the tool that I mentioned that converts this, it converts Azure and Office 365 pricing into this per user per month pricing. So again, not going to go into too much detail, but you can type in information like how many desktops will you have, how many of them will be VDI, how many of them will need GPUs, what version of the product do you want to add in here, what type of servers and storage. You can add additional servers into the mix. You can say how many Office 365 licenses. Then there's some cost assumptions you can modify, etc. And then you click view costs. And what this does is it will actually design an Azure deployment for you. We'll show you all the VMs, what the sizes are, what type of storage they'll use, what type of reserved instances, if any, what type of licenses you're going to need, etc. And it's going to break down the Azure costs down to its subcomponents. So this is how much desktops are going to cost, this is how much servers are going to cost, this is storage, this is bandwidth, VPNs and IP addresses, so down to the very minute components. It breaks it all down, but most importantly, it rolls it up into this per user per month cost. So that is Nerdio for Azure, and it was great having you join me and have the opportunity to show it to you. Thank you.